Thank you for tuning into this how-to video regarding expense management and mission control. Expense management comes out of the box in mission control and seamlessly integrates with other parts of the system, which allow you to track, create, and manage your expenses. Users are able to create and submit expenses whether it relates to a project or not. There are a number of different places that you can create and view your expenses. Let's check it out. In the progress pad of the Mission Control console, you'll have the Log Expenses button. This will allow you to log multiple expenses at one time. Another place that you can find the Log Expenses modal will be at the utility bar in the bottom of the Mission Control app. This will open up the Log Expense model and shows the component that is also available on Salesforce Mobile. The great thing about this is you can also upload an image of your receipt from here, the compact layout. You can also go ahead and save the expense from here. Another place that you can submit your expense records would be from your project, going into the expense tab. And then you'll also have the expense object in the navigation bar where you can create and manage your expenses as well. We'll check that out in a little bit. Alright, so let's take a look into some of the settings required around this feature. The first thing you'll want to do if you're logging expenses to a project is to navigate to the expense settings. Here you can establish your markup percentage, review any anticipated project expenses, billing information regarding your expenses, and then expense approval. So if the project owner is required to approve all expenses, anything that is logged against this project will need approval from the person who is assigned as the project owner. In the second field, the role manager, if this is marked true, the role that is established as the expense approver on a role record will be the person who approves that expense. Now, another thing to notice while we're on the role record is that you'll also want to establish mileage rate for each user. All right, let's go ahead back to our project and set that markup percentage. We're going to do a 10% markup. I will also require role manager approval for any expenses logged against the project. Go ahead and get back to the Mission Control console and create a few expenses from the expense logger. Alright, so from here, you have the ability to select the role that incurred the expenses. So once I select the user, or this role is related to a user, the mileage rate will automatically populate from that resource. Alright, you'll want to populate the details as required. So for this one, I've selected the project and milestone that this expense relates to. I can also relate the expense to purchase items and budget items from here. We'll create this again an expense against a purchase item a little bit later. We'll select the source that the expense was paid from, the date, and other amount fields. So in this example, I'm populating the distance, so the cost amounts aren't required in the markup. You can see that it auto-populates the amount claimed based on the mileage rate resource. Alright, let's go ahead and add another role. And again, I will select the project that I am logging against and the milestone. And this time, I am going to populate the cost amount and the cost tax. This will also allow me to mark that a markup is required. There are validation rules in the system that are active out of the box that ensures that you populate the cost and tax cost when you're using the markup required. Alright, let's go ahead and save this. Also, another thing to note that if it is a non-billable expense on a time and materials project, it will not be included in any invoices that are generated. Let's go ahead and hit save and submit. So if I was to save my expense, it will be saved in a pending status for me to be able to make changes before submitting to my executives. Um, if I select save and submit, the expense will be marked submitted, which will send it over to my approver for approval. So let's go ahead and save and submit. And we'll take a look at that approvals tab later. So you can see that the expenses have been created successfully. All right. Next, let's take a look at creating a expense from the expense tab on our project. So I already have my project open here. I'm going to go into the expenses tab. Now I can create one from here, which will open up the record detail for a new expense record. All right. So I do want to go ahead and log a expense against a purchase order, which can also be found in this expense tab. Great thing is I can see the amount from the purchase orders in the summary at the top. I get a summary of all expenses, the different categories, and then lastly in this last chart I can see the amount of anticipated project expenses, what has been logged for billable and what has been logged as non-billable. In this tab here I have a purchase order with details that are already populated. It already has the purchase order items that are relating to it and rolling up the total. So I have one quantity of food and beverages and the unit price, the amounts for those, and then that is what rolls up to the amount on our purchase order. To update the amount outstanding, we're going to hit new expense. It already populated my project. I'm going to go ahead and populate my purchase order. I can also relate it to a milestone if required. And these ones have the amount in there, no need for a markup. Incurred the expense and when, the source as well, and then the payment status. So we are going to mark this as paid and populate the amount. Next, we're going to set the status to submitted so that it can send to the approver. And let's hit save. Alright, so now our expense has been created. Let's navigate to our purchase order and refresh to see if the amount outstanding has updated. Alright, so we can now see that the amount paid has been updated. There is $0 outstanding for this purchase item. Alright, so now that we have our purchase order finished and a few other expenses logged, let's go ahead and check how to approve your expense records. So to get to this expenses requiring my approval list view, I went to the expense object in the navigation menu, and then I went to the drop down from the list views and selected expenses requiring my approval. Now that I have this selected, I chose to pin it so that it's readily available when I navigate to the expense tab. Alright, so this is showing me a few expenses logged, the few ones that we've logged today and others from other time periods. This list view has been updated to include the project owner approval or role manager approval fields. That allows me to see where I need to update the submitted status, okay? So as you can see, when the project owner is requiring approval, I'll need to update the project owner submitted field. When the role manager approval is required, I will need to update the role manager approval fields, okay? So I'm going to use the checkboxes to mass update these. And since project owner approval is required here, I'm going to update the project owner fields to approved. And then I'm going to uncheck these. And for the remainder that require role manager approval, I'm going to mark those as approved. I also noticed a few here that are submitted and should be approved. Alright, and we're going to hit save. All of my expenses are now approved, and if I refresh, they will clear from my queue. The last thing that I would like to review are a few settings that are available on the expense object in the object manager. This is more so for our Salesforce administrators. If you would like to manage the fields available on the expense tab, you can do so from a field set here. And then lastly, there are a few validation rules on the expense object. You can choose to mark these active or deactivate them. However, the two enforced cost values and only distance or amount can be entered will be active upon installing the application. Thank you so much for tuning into this how-to video regarding expense management. Have a great day.